All right, everybody. We are live again for our third session. Our third session for today is about equity and inclusion in beer. I have two amazing employees that work for me, Jubal and Paul Metzger-Smith, who are sitting here to my right. They're going to be leading the panel. I am going to step off from here and pass it over to them, and they will be introducing the rest of our panelists and where we will go from there. Enjoy, and feel free to ask questions on your right in the comment section. We will be doing Q&A at the end of this, so we'll be keeping track of all of this. All right, enjoy. Go ahead. It's all you, bud.
Oh, it's all us. Hi, guys. Welcome to the FML Fest 2020, streaming live here from Ouzel Finch Beers and Blending on the historic Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. It is an honor to be part of this, truly, and it's amazing. So today we're going to be talking about equity and inclusion in the beer industry. So we have three panelists that are going to be joining us today. The first one is Dr. J. Jackson Beckham. Second one is Eugenia Brown. And then the last one is Eric Jackson Jr. So the first person we're going to be going to, I guess I had to introduce myself, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Paul Metzger-Smith. I work here at Ouzel Finch Beers and Blending. I am the manager, the taproom manager, and the events manager here. And I've been working for over 2 years, and I've known Russ for over 12 years. So, and that's who I am. And I would like to pass it off to my husband, Jubal Metzger-Smith.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jubal Metzger-Smith. I have been here I actually joined the team probably as an employee a little over a year ago. It was last June. So I help coordinate food trucks and live music. And I love working here. Obviously, we're very inclusive. So this is a great space to work and feel safe.
Truly. So we're going to go right to our panelists. The first person I have the honor of introducing to you guys is Dr. J. Jackson Beckham. Dr. J has dedicated her career to the study of American beer. She is an author, speaker, frequent media expert on the culture of craft beer. Dr. J craft beverage organizations develop inclusive, equitable, and just practices that drive success, build communities, and empower individuals through her consultancy of Crafted for All. She is also the founder and executive director of Craft by EDU, a nonprofit whose mission is to champion equity, inclusion, and justice in the craft brewing community through education and professional development. Dr. J was recently named Imbibe Magazine's 2020 Person of the Year. Dr. J, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time to join us and share your knowledge with us. We really appreciate you. So if you want to go ahead and we have to unmute. Just give us a little bit more information about you and your vision and what you got going on.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jubal. It's been great to meet you guys. Hello, everyone out there who is enjoying this wonderful Saturday. I hope you have something delicious in hand. So let's start a little bit with a cheers. Salut, everybody. I am here to kind of kick off this panel with a couple of broad thoughts. One of the things that you might have gathered from that wonderful introduction that Paul just gave me is that most of my work is pointed at the craft brewing industry. So I spend a lot of my conversations talking with brewers, people in allied trade, other professional associations, and helping them to become more inclusive, equitable, and just. Now, I think the big question that often I get, and perhaps that some of you have in mind, is why does it matter? Right? Why should we care who drinks craft beer, who makes craft beer? And while I think it's a tough question, I think it's actually a fair one and maybe worth answering. And so first, I think we need to look at the kind of financial imperative. We don't like to talk about money making a lot, but look, like we can face it, everybody's in the business to thrive. And I think that craft beer is a remarkable industry in that 85% of Americans over 21 and up live within 10 miles of a craft brewery, which is just remarkable. There are few industries that are so geographically spread and dispersed around the US. There's a job for you at a craft brewery, whether you have a GED or a PhD, whether you are a plumber or a microbiologist, and they're excellent sources of community employment. And the craft brewing industry's impact crosses a number of industries, from engineering to raw ingredients. And so there's a real opportunity there to grow communities, to grow individual skills, and to think about personal empowerment from the position of entrepreneurs and community leaders. Of course, I also think there's a moral and ethical imperative that's less about politics and more about doing the right thing. We are an industry who has for a long time talked about being pillars of our communities and places where people can come together and meet. And in order to do so, it only makes sense to make spaces where everyone feels comfortable being themselves and taking advantage of all of the wonderful things that craft beer has to offer. Now, a lot of people ask, how do you work on this in an industry that has kind of famously been the home of bearded white guys? And for me, it's really about getting people to be a little bit more conscious about the ways they run their businesses and the ways they interact with their communities. And specifically, I ask people for three things, not two, but three things. First, I ask them not to convince the ends and the means. And that's simply about thinking about how you get to the end point. We hear a lot of people saying they want to increase diversity these days and saying, oh, we want more diverse staff or we want more diverse customers. But I always tell people that diversity is an end goal. It's not the process that you use to get there. So you can say, I value diversity as much as you want, but that's not going to change anything. It's a little bit like saying, I have a black belt in jujitsu and expecting that that's going to give you the skills to engage somebody in combat. That's why I talk about being inclusive, being equitable, and pursuing justice, because I think those are the things we do so that the end goal is greater diversity. The second thing I ask of my clients and brewery partners is to forget about bait and start thinking about barriers. Lots of people will say, what kinds of things can I do to draw a more diverse crowd? So you'll probably see some crappy hip hop nights out there in an attempt to reach out to an urban customer. But I tell people, don't worry about trying to make some bait to pander to people and bring them into your brewery. It's better to ask the question, what kind of barriers are people experiencing that keep them from forming a relationship with my brewery or my brand? And then just saying, like, let's remove the barriers that people might be experiencing. Now, some of those barriers might be completely simple things that you can do, like getting rid of offensive beer labels, or making sure that your staff is trained not to make stereotyping microaggressions when people come. But some of the other things are larger barriers that may have nothing to do with your brewery and may have been long embedded in the community you live in. And in order to overcome barriers like that, it's really about engaging your community, maybe getting involved through philanthropy, making relationships that are authentic so that people trust and want to come make a relationship with you and your brand. Finally, the third thing I tell people is please don't fall for the one and done. Everything that you do that you're good at, I'm pretty sure you weren't great at it the first time you started, right? Whether it's swinging a golf club or learning a dance or brewing beer, generally you kind of suck at things for a while before you get great at them. And not a lot of people would do something once and expect to be proficient, but for some reason, people will have one training about greater cultural aptitude, or one implicit bias training, or one diversity training, and then they're like, okay, we're great now. And that's pretty absurd. I think we need to think about these as a constant, ongoing process, right? How do we act more inclusively to bring people to the table? How do we ensure that everyone's having the same equitable quality of experience? And how do we act in just ways? These are not going to be things that are accomplished in a one-time deal. We're going to have to put processes in place, do some assessment, do some thinking, and then go put new processes in place if that didn't work. It's an ongoing effort that employers and businesses need to commit to over the long term if they really expect to affect positive cultural change. So that's a really quick version of some of the things I talked to brewers about. But this festival is a lot more about consumers and what consumers can do to make authentic relationships with craft breweries and help craft breweries understand how to bridge some of the barriers that may be out there between them and underrepresented populations in craft beer. And to speak to that, I invited 2 other panelists that you're going to meet in just a moment who have done some incredible work as passionate consumers to make these really beautiful partnerships with organizations in the brewing industry that are empowering and bring all sorts of people, new ideas, new perspectives, new flavors to the table. And that's the kind of conversation that I want to have, because I often don't get to talk to consumers, and this is an outstanding way to kind of open up this conversations and allow consumers to represent themselves authentically without being pandered to or without becoming tokens.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. J. We look forward to hearing from you later with questions that will come up as the panel progresses. So you mentioned you've invited a couple other people. So the next one I want to introduce is Eugenia Brown. So a little bit of background. Eugenia is a Cicerone certified beer server, founder of Beer Chick LLC, and beer influencer who uses her platform to celebrate, empower, and connect people who share a love of beer. She is active in her community and is an advocate and champion for diversity and inclusion in all spaces and places. Her goal is to continue to change the narrative as a Black woman in the craft beer industry and continue to elevate the voices of other women of color who enjoy drinking beer. So thank you so much for being with us, Eugenia. So would you care to talk a little bit more about what your goals and mission is for the beer industry?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Dr. J, for inviting me. You know, I love beer and I love the beer industry. And so when I tell people my story and how I started, it really just kind of started off as a passion project. I just wanted to meet people and share my love of beer. And, you know, from there, it's turned into something bigger than I could ever imagine. And so really, I just try to use my platform to highlight women of color that are into craft beer. But more than anything, I think bring people together. You know, I truly believe that beer is the connecting force as it relates to all of us in this industry. But even outside of that, I think it connects us outside of the industry as far as the community is concerned. And so recently, I've just been trying to engage myself as much as possible to help bring more minority women into craft beer. And so one of the big projects I launched was, just trying to help women get their certified beer server certification. And so my idea behind that was, you know, through beer education, and I'm definitely a believer in education in all things. I think knowledge is power. That hopefully would help kind of bridge that gap and, you know, eliminate those barriers as it relates to them getting jobs or just really connecting to the industry. And so really excited about that. I had a goal of connecting 50 women, and Cicerone matched that with 50 more. And so, yeah, you know, my platform is about just sharing with people my love of beer and definitely just creating space for women of color that love beer.
Amazing. Thank you, Eugenia, very much. I look forward to hearing more responses from you from the upcoming questions. The next person I'd like to introduce to you guys is Eric D. Jackson Jr. Eric comes to us from Richmond, Virginia. He is the founder and owner of Uncap Everything, LLC. And he also doubles as a freelance beer writer and journalist that travels across the country reviewing various breweries and beers, curating beer festivals, as well as running Capsule, a collective of individuals focused on energizing and assisting in diversifying tap rooms while expanding palates through his use of monthly podcasts and magazines, as well as hop crawls. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming on and taking your time to be with us. How about you? Can you expand a little bit more onto what your mission, your goals are in the industry?
I think you did an amazing job. I don't know what else I can say. My name's Eric Jackson. This is one of the co-founders, Ty Murdahl. So I'll start with Uncap Everything, similar to like your drink. Uncap Everything was just for me a way to journal my education through beer. And this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I would drink a beer and post it to Instagram. Horrible phone. I wasn't trying to impress anybody. But along my journey, I found out more information, and I was exposed to so much more. That's a nutshell of what everything has been and what it is now. But transferring that to Capsule, which is really that's the baby of Uncap, is that Capsule, like you said, desires to help energize and diversify capital. And even more than that, I think it's about exposure to other demographics, especially Black people in the community, about the good craft beer that's out in the community. It's a way to give back to the community, support the community, but also for me, it's a way for me to work with breweries to make sure that their tap rooms are inclusive of any and everyone that comes in. I think by what we do with Capsule, like today we actually have an event at Boston. We came out with a beer collaboration. And you can tell by the people that came out to support Capsule in and of itself is diverse. I didn't have to say, I didn't have to put anything out there. I think that it's just by nature of what we do and being cognizant of being inclusive to everybody, because that's what, as a Black man, I have to live that every day. So when we run our events, we kind of have that same mindset. And I think that so far we've been pretty successful in what we're doing.
Awesome. Hey, Eric, who's the gentleman next to you?
Oh, hey. So my name is Ty Murdahl. I am the co-founder also of Capsule. My beer journey actually began when my wife introduced me to an IPA. Never did like IPAs. Didn't think they were for people like me, Black people. But I was still stuck on Coors or what is it?
He was drinking 40s.
Yeah.
Or good Miller Lite.
I didn't understand that. So when I first got to Richmond, because I'm originally from DC, and we didn't have a big beer scene when I was growing up. Like, it was non-existent. It's coming up now, but it's still not the same like here in Richmond. I tried a porter for the first time. Sweet Baby Jesus. I will always remember that one. And I was hooked. I wanted to try more and more. That's when my wife gave me the IPA. Through that, I met Eric when he was working over at Champion.
Yep.
And he had this crazy idea of bringing people like me that don't know exactly where to go or where to find these type of beers at, and showing them, hey, people like me, Black women, Black men, people of color, and women of color truly love craft beer. And there's a space for us. And we want that space to be with everyone else.
Love that. Love that. There is a space for all. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I would like to circle back to Dr. J. You brought up barriers. That's going to be the first talking point. Barriers that exist for marginalized people in the craft beer industry. So Jubal and I, being members of the LGBTQ community, have have experienced a lot of different issues going to places, whether it be restaurants, bars, breweries. One of the things that we have to face while going somewhere is this place safe? Is this a place that we can walk in and, I don't know, hold hands or put my arm around my husband or whatever the case may be? Is it a safe place? So as a consumer, those are hurdles that we face. Like, those are different things that we have to face as a consumer. So you guys have all had issues and hurdles that you've had to face, not only as consumers, but as advocates and activists, like taking on that new role. So you faced a whole new set of challenges. How do you navigate as a consumer? Now, as a consumer, how do you navigate those challenges, those hurdles that you guys have faced? And we'll start with Dr. J.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably a little bit differently as a industry advocate and as a consumer. I think as an industry advocate, the most important message that I try to give to people is just because you might not perceive the barrier doesn't mean it's not real, right? Like, a lot of people are like, what? Nothing's stopping people from coming in the door, right? Or nobody was mean to you, or blah, 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 right? And I'm just kind of like, okay, just because you didn't perceive it doesn't mean it's not real, right? So as an advocate, that's really the kind of central message that I try to send. And I'm like, you have to be a little vulnerable and be willing to just talk to people about their experiences so that you can learn about those barriers, because there's no secret way to figure it out without doing the hard work of just getting to know people and listening. As a consumer, I think it just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Many times I'm like, I don't want to deal, so I leave, right? And I think a lot of people do this. I think sometimes I'm like, I've been brewing beer since you were in second grade, so you can step, right? So sometimes I just flex, and it's just like, okay, we'll do big D energy right now, fine, right? But the fact that it's you have to always, right, manage, or that you're that's the part that I'm like, man, it would be awesome to just come here and not think about it at all and just get a beer. And the places where I just don't have to think about it, where I can go get a beer and it's straight, awesome, you will see my face again and again and again and again. And I think that's important for people who are in the business of selling beer to know.
So the one thing that Jubal and I have, one of the, even the smallest thing, the simplest thing is on a door, there are the triangles that say safe space. This is a safe place, and it's got the rainbow flag on it. The simplest thing that can change our comfort level of walking into a place. I mean, that's something that we look for, and that I don't know, it's just it's the simplest things. And it's, yeah. So we go to and so Eugenia, how about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Dr. J brought up a lot of great points. And, I have to kind of speak to the duality of working in the industry as well as being a consumer. And so I've been in the industry for probably about 2 years now. And so, I've brewed beer before. I've worked as a beer tender. I've done a little bit of both. And I can't tell you the amount of times people have walked through the brewery doors to, sit down and look at the menu. But when it comes time for them to ask a question about the beer, they defer to my coworker because they assume I don't know anything about the beer. And, I was fortunate enough to be in a space where my coworker, who was a white guy, would always say, oh, well, we're all brewers here. So, Eugenia could answer any question that you have. But people didn't realize that. And so, there have been some days where I was so frustrated because they look at me and assume that, oh, I'm not credible, or, I don't know anything about it. And it can be really discouraging sometimes. And so on the consumer part of things, I think, walking into a space where you don't see anyone that looks like you is really important. I don't think people realize how much representation matters, but it definitely matters. And so when you're able to walk into a space and see a person behind the bar that looks like you, it can sometimes make all of the difference. And, even walking in and someone greeting you with a smile on your face, as opposed to just kind of giving you a look like, oh, well, what are you doing here? Or, do you even know anything about beer? I walk in breweries all the time and I kind of get annoyed with it. They're like, oh, well, what do you like to drink? As if like I've never had a beer before. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is, not making assumptions. And I love what Dr. J said about, just because something doesn't directly affect you, it doesn't mean it isn't real. And so, there are a lot of invisible barriers that exist, even if you can just walk straight through the door. And so having someone that is simply smiling at you makes a difference. Having a person greet you in the first minute or two that you walk in, as opposed to 5 minutes later, because they're just like, oh, well, you're not important. That makes a difference. And so it's been a really interesting experience, but I definitely think that we all deserve to be in safe spaces, and we all have the responsibility to make sure that we're contributing to a safe space.
Eugenia, that's an amazing point about just walking in and just feeling welcome immediately. I know here at Ouzelfinch, as the manager, one of the things that I try to instill into the bartenders that I work with, and it's our culture also. Russ, it comes from the top down. It's the leadership from top down is being able to instill into our bartenders that is so important, to connect with them right away, to smile, to welcome them. I mean, literally, I've been to so many breweries also where that is just not the case. What do you want to drink? And it's like, or you want a beer? Well, yeah, I'm here. But it's the smile, it's the engagement. And we really, like here at Ouzelfinch, that is something we really practice and try to practice all the time. So thank you so much, Eugenia. Awesome. Yeah. How about you, Eric? What are your thoughts?
Got it. You got it, man.
I think that, so prior to me working in the beer industry, I used to work for Marriott, which is the #1 hospitality brand, I think, in the world. So if you look at the tap room from a hospitality standpoint, I think some breweries fail at that initiative to be hospitable. So like she said, when you walk in, you immediately say, hello, thanks for being here. What can I do for you? Instead of having this awkward silence of people just looking at you in a way. And I think for as a Black man, I already have this notion, if I walk into a place, I feel like I'm the only one. And then I start internalizing, right? So that's something that I think people just have to understand, like we're all human beings. So when I walk in, I'm already like, this might not be the spot for me. Thankfully, a lot of the breweries that I've been to haven't been that way, but there have been some experiences that kind of turned me off at different breweries that I've been to, that I've just, kind of written them off.
And just me speaking as a consumer, just like and first and foremost, Eugenia, Dr. J, you killed it with your answers. Going into a space where there aren't people that look like me, and this will go doubly for Black women, because it's doubly as dangerous. It's like you don't feel welcome, or anything could pop off at any type of moment where you don't see other people like you to feel safe while you're drinking your beer. Sometimes if you know the place, it's great, but as someone who came into this blind and new, I didn't go into breweries because I didn't think they were for me, and I didn't think that they were going to be somewhere safe where I could go, or I could just sit down and not have to look at how many exits there are just in case something happens. Or say if someone calls the police because I don't look like I should be there. Representation really, really does matter when you're in these spaces, seeing other people of color, other women of color, just knowing, even if it's something as small as putting up a gay pride flag, to let them know that, hey, the LGBTQTIA, I butchered that. However, but people, gays, gay people, lesbian women, trans men and women, that they are welcome in a space just by seeing a little itty bitty flag and knowing that they can enjoy beer with the community.
Can I say something else too? I just want to say this because in just thinking about like my example I use about, working at a brewery where we were all brewers, we all worked the bar. And we also shouldn't need, and I'll just be frank, white people to validate our existence. So, my coworkers shouldn't have to advocate for me to show that I'm credible. Just like I think the experience is different when you walk into a tap room with maybe a group of white friends as opposed to when you walk into a tap room by yourself as a Black person. I think the experience is very different. And so, we'll probably at some point talk about allyship because we're talking about what can we do as consumers, but we shouldn't need other people to validate our existence because we deserve to be there if we want to be there. And so I just wanted to add that.
So I appreciate that very much. And it's very true. We shouldn't have to have anybody to validate. So how do we navigate that? How do we?
And it kind of leads into the next question, where that there are some breweries and some businesses that you go into where you feel safe, they're inclusive, they support diversity, you have no issues going in there, and you're probably more apt to support those types of businesses. But what about some of the other industries that don't really practice like social norms? They're not up on social issues. How do you navigate that? Like, for example, several years ago there was a well-known pasta industry that came out. They were very against the LGBT community. And so there was a big backlash. And so people stopped supporting them, members of our community. Well, then later on they changed and came back around. But now what about businesses now who they're not inclusive? Where do you draw the line? How do you as a consumer and as an advocate try to open up dialogues with these type of businesses so that you can encourage inclusivity? How do you go about addressing those types of issues? And Eugenia, you want to start us off with that?
I think first and foremost that everyone should be informed as it relates to where people stand on certain issues, even breweries. A lot of times we don't really see breweries as spaces to really, I guess, divulge in different topics and to really choose sides. But in the reality, even businesses have to really choose sides. And I think we've saw recently, especially, how important it is to just be open and honest and be transparent sometimes. And I wanted to say that, I'm not willing to spend my money or my dollars in a place that does not support me or accepts me. However, what I will say is that I am willing to sit down and have a conversation and have a beer with anybody. And I think that's what makes the difference. I'm always open to dialogue. I'm always open to having a conversation because sometimes it's just a lack of understanding. And I truly believe in the power of just sitting down and having a conversation and really discussing it and laying it all on the table. I think there are a lot of people that sometimes are oblivious to different things. And so conversations are important. But, I think it is important that we educate ourselves on, who is, for lack of better words, who is for us and who is not. Because it makes a difference. So.
I just want to tag onto that real quick, Eugenia. When I first came out, I came out to my sister. So like the first people I came out to, big deal, huge deal. And one of the things she said to me, well, she already knew is what she said. I'm like, okay. So, but one of the things she said to me was, Paul, you are the educator. You are the one who has to make the difference. You're the one who has to show the people what's different. Why, if it's different, why is it doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be scary. I'm the one in being approachable. And I think that is so important, that our attitude with this is like, we've got to be the educators. We're the ones. And I don't mind doing that. I mean, dialogue is so important. Communication. I mean, that's it. That's what it's all about, is communication. So thank you, Eugene. Dr. J?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that that's so very much just consistent with how I work and how I am as well. I will, I've made it really public. Like, I don't really care how bad you fucked it up. I'll still sit down and help you get better, right? But I think it's also extremely important to say that, like, no one is owed that generosity, right? I have chosen to offer that generosity, and I have chosen to do that work in that way, but like, no, that's nobody's entitled to it, right? So I think one of the other things that I think is really important is that if you are someone who lacks information or has blundered or has violated the trust of your community, if you have people who are willing to sit down and say, hey, let's work this out, recognize that act of generosity from people like Yuji and from you, Paul, like, because that's not owed, right? And I think that, like, I want people to kind of like be generous and to be willing to sit down and have dialogue, but I also don't want people to feel like they're entitled to it either, right? And so that's for me like a really important distinction.
Grace goes a long way.
Yeah. Eric, do you have any thoughts to chime in on this topic?
Sorry.
I was just wondering if you had any additional thoughts about where do we draw that line when it comes to businesses or having a dialogue about these important issues? What's worked for you in the past? What hasn't worked?
I think I approach it differently depending on the relationship that I have with that brewery. There have been breweries that I've worked with before, doing what we do with Capsule, that I have felt that our word was not being, or our voice was not being heard. And in those moments, you kind of let them do what they need to do, and then I'll speak on it. So there have been times where I have brought it up and mentioned things that I felt was not right and unequal to what we were doing as a brand and to the mission that we were up against. I think in other instances because I am so far removed from a brewery and the actions that they do, I'll speak out on it on a local level to my friends and things like that as a consumer. But as a business, I'll just, through my work and what we do with the community, that would just be one brewery that we wouldn't work with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So the next topic we're going to talk about, and we've already touched on it a little bit. It's about having the dialogue with people. I know, just speaking from my experience, I grew up in Iowa, which is very white, and so my frame of reference was different. It wasn't until I got much older that I had to start looking at things from outside of that little box that I grew up in. And so several years ago, I started having a dialogue with people of color, and because I wanted to find out, and I have to tell you how incredibly awkward and difficult those conversations were. But they were so incredible because they just helped me to grow as a person. So how important is that dialogue? So before we were kind of focusing on businesses that were socially conscious, but now just having a dialogue with people about inclusivity and diversity. You touched on it, Dr. J, that no one really, no one is entitled to have that dialogue, but how do you approach that, and how important is it?
I gave up a career as a college professor to do this full time, so I obviously think it's really important. It's, again, I think it's important in a lot of different ways, right? It's not just about ethical decisions or moral decisions, and I genuinely believe this is not political. I think it's about right or wrong, right? But I also, for me, I'm really interested in small business as a lever of community uplift, right? I am deeply invested in helping marginalized and underrepresented communities represent themselves in ways that are like authentic and lead to people thriving genuinely. That can happen all over the place. It just so happens that like I fell in love with beer 20 years ago, right? Like, and it just so happened that this has been a wonderful, amazing community for me to be a part of. And so for me, it's less about beer and more about like the world that I want to create. Beer just happens to be an amazing tool, right? Like it just happens to be like the hammer I want to swing, and like, you know, like other people use other hammers, but like I like mine. It's tasty, right? So yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to have these conversations. And you know, for me, the piece I really like to drive home is that, you know, the things that I'm talking about are not special programs for special people, right? Like if you run a more inclusive, equitable, and just business, it's better for everybody, right? Everybody benefits. Like this is the part that I get so frustrated when people are like hesitant to have these conversations, because I'm like, this isn't a zero-sum game, right? If somebody wins, somebody else doesn't lose. Everybody gets a cookie if we do this right. Right? Like, so I'm just like, let's all get our cookies, right?
Agreed. So the next thing I want to talk about is something that actually was during our first talk when I was at home and I just had surgery, and something was brought up, and I don't know if it was Russ or Dr. J or Eugenia talked about transformative as opposed to transactional. Like when I started thinking about that, I thought like that was mind-blowing to me. Like, how do we change our mindset? It's like a mindset, because most of the time when we're faced with issues that come to you have to deal with a situation, it's transactional. It can be transactional, like quick, let's try to solve this, but how do we transform it?
So it's long term.
So it's long term, right? So the mindset of being transformative as opposed to transactional, which I'm like that is stuck in my head. So like, am I a transformative person or a transactional person? Like I'm going to approach my dealings with my bartenders, the staff here, the customers that come in here. What am I doing to promote that, to be transformative? So what do you say about that, Dr. J?
Very quickly. Yes, that's a drum I beat all the time, right? And so it's for me, it comes down to, instead of asking what do I get, asking what do I learn and how can I change? And I'll shut up now and let somebody else say.
Eugenia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and then we're going to go to Eric.
I would just say that I think we realize now, and it possibly took us a long time to get here, is that it's not just a box you check. Like you don't check it and then it's done and you wake up tomorrow and the world's a better place. It's something that has to, keep happening day by day. And so I think the biggest thing with that is, one of the things I really try to do is operate in authenticity. And so I'm so big on just operating in my truth, speaking my truth. And that may be different for a lot of people, but I think there is power in truly speaking your truth and sharing experiences. And so as consumers, I think one of the main things you could do that's really simple is call stuff what it is. Like, when talking about being transformative or transactional, be more proactive about things. So yeah, we see things happen at breweries all the time. And so then they have to respond and they're reactive. But I think, how do we get in front of that? And the way we get in front of that is by making sure that we're having these conversations on a daily basis, making sure that it's not just one training, making sure that, the people that work behind our bars truly represent and value what we do as breweries or as a company. And so, I think the conversation doesn't just end, it has to be ongoing. And I think by operating in authenticity, we're able to have really honest conversations. And, you talk about being uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, if it's awkward, that's a good thing. Because when you're uncomfortable, I think that's when true change happens. And that's when you truly are able to just be open to just seeing other perspectives and seeing different things. So I challenge everyone to be uncomfortable. It's a great place to be in.
I agree with that so
It
much.
really is, because that's what promotes those long-term changes. So it's not just transactional, it's transformative. Yeah.
Eric, how about you?
I'm gonna flip this over to Ty on this.
Ty. Okay, thanks.
All right. And just to piggyback on Eugenia, empathy. Just if instead of always trying to come up with the playing devil's advocate, instead of always trying to say, well, what if this, just as my friend Chris always said, shut up and listen. Just listen. You don't have to have a counterpoint to everything. If we're talking about our experiences and what we go through, just listen and be open to that and be open up to criticism. If someone's criticizing you, it's because they care. If we didn't care and we didn't want this, we would just ignore it. We just go away. We just go somewhere else. So this is someone's industry and a place that we really want our voices heard because we love it. And just listen.
Listen. Absolutely, just listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the best thing to do. Just to let people want to be heard.
And it's their lived experience. So listening and respecting that lived experience makes a huge difference. And I like that. That's a really good point too, Ty, about having an open mind. Because we grow up with these preconceived ideas of how the world is supposed to be. But then when we have these dialogues and we want to really grow and be transformative, we have to be willing to actually listen to it and say, wow, that's a whole different perspective. And that's the real challenge, especially for people who have not been marginalized, people who don't know what it's like to, like for people of color, where people look at you because of the color of your skin. Like even with Paul and I, we're LGBTQ, but you don't really know that by looking at us. And it's not until I say this is my husband, or I put my hand on his hand or whatever, that's how people know that we're of a different, a marginalized group. So, but I think that these types of dialogues are so important and so interesting.
Absolutely. I think I want to have a t-shirt made that says "Shut up and listen." I mean, that's an amazing.
There might be one.
That honestly, that is like just shut up and listen. I think that's the next t-shirt. So, you guys, thank you for your thoughts on all of these things. So now we're gonna shift over to question and answer. So we're gonna get some question and answers from folks, and we're gonna unmute everyone. So, one down.
We all just were like, wait, what?
So the first question there is from Dave Cook. So what can we, who are the stereotypical craft brewery consumer, bearded white men, do to help make sure that we are making craft beer spaces and the industry overall more welcoming?
Start with Eugenia.
No, you mean.
I'll just say that a big assumption that you have when you talk about Black and brown people as it relates to beer is that, they don't drink craft beer. Historically, we drink lots of beer, maybe not craft beer because we haven't been exposed to it. So I challenge everyone to invite someone different or someone new to the brewery. Invite someone that you've never seen into the space before and see how that can possibly just transform that space. So that's a really easy fix, but I think inviting more people to the space is a great way to do that.
Dr. J.
Sorry, I was slow on the unmute. So two things come to mind. I think one thing didn't even occur to me until it happened. But I was at a beer bar, and the same bartender basically asked me if I liked, do you like light or dark beer? And the person next to him, he offered him some super rare keg that they just put on. Right. And I feel like it just went straight over my head. I didn't even think about it. But the guy was like, maybe she wants to try that, just kind of made a call just saying like, you clearly just treated me differently than the person next to me. And I didn't even catch it until he said something, and he didn't say it antagonistically. He just kind of pointed out a difference. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I did want to try that. Like, thanks for just pointing out like the simple moment where like things could go wrong. Right. That was really great. And then I think another thing for me is, I advocate for inclusion and equity and justice, and I talk a lot about diversity. And I think there's a tendency to conflate that, to think I'm only talking about racial diversity. And I'm like, no, I'm literally talking about everybody. And so, when we talk about stereotypical craft beer guy, bearded white men, I also want to say, I know all bearded white men are not the same dude, right? Like, some of them like to do like way different things, and they got different music styles and they got everything. So I also feel like one thing bearded white dudes can do is also like, don't let people put you in a block and like just say that like you all want the same thing, right? Like, you are individuals too. Like, everybody be an individual. That's how we're gonna see each other for like the unique people we are. Like, don't allow your right. Like, Russ put his head in here. Russ is bearded as every other dude. Like, let's stop being so lazy about our dialogue and like see people for who they are.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. Eric, quickly, what are your thoughts on this? Eric, it's
Yeah. I'll grab that one. So as a stereotypical craft beer consumer, bearded white man, you are because of the way that everything's structured and the way everything is, you are a gateway into this. If you are someone that would like to bring people like us or people that are trans or gay or anything else like that into these spaces, you are protectors. Use as a shield and bring us in unabashedly. Like, it's just the norm. Because that's what it should be. I shouldn't have to feel any type of way that, hey, I'm a black man or I'm a black woman or I'm a gay man or I'm a trans woman or man. No, this is normal. Bring us in unabashedly.
I'm going to piggyback off that because initially I didn't have an answer to this, but I think Ty brought up a great point. I think when I first got into beer, which was maybe like 7-8 years ago, to his point, I had a gentleman that I worked with that took me out to a beer bar. This is when I lived in Nashville. First of all, he didn't have a beard. Very, very clean cut guy. And that really started me on my journey to where I am now. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the answer that he gave. It makes sense.
Great.
very good.
All right. So the next question comes from Austin John. How do you begin to institute positive change in a super conservative geographic area? Really good point.
So I don't know if we have time for everybody to answer these because we're going to get to some other questions. So Eugenia, we'll let you go with this one. If you want to.
That's a hard question. I think when I start thinking like conservative or liberal, I start thinking politics. But what I will say is that when it comes to just beer and the issues that we're dealing with, I think it's not political at all. And Dr. J shared this. I think it's more of a humanity issue. It's like matters of the heart. And so it should just be a safe space for everyone. Everyone should feel welcomed. As far as how do you begin to institute positive change, I think this is a really hard question, but I don't really see it as political. I feel like it's a human issue. Yeah. And that's where we struggle. So it's really hard for me to answer that question. But
I think we're circling back to what we've been talking about. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation. It's sitting down with somebody who's willing to listen to you. And that's how change begins. Talking, communicating.
Yeah, and I will just make a plug here. So on my consultancy, Crafted for All, I have something called the Crafted for All Commitment. It's 20 action items across 7 areas that breweries and other beer organizations can commit to run more inclusive, equitable, and just organizations. So if you go to craftedforall.com/commit, you will see the kind of action items there, and you'll see a list of almost 30 organizations who have already committed to changing our organizational cultures. So a lot of times, people are like, I don't understand what I could do. I made this so that like these are some easy steps and it's an easy framework to move forward. And it's just, again, like if you look at those items and you see the types of things that we're using to drive change, you should see that it's not going to ring politics, right? It's going to be about running a better business. And for me, that's a really great way to frame the question, right? This is about running better businesses. So if for some reason you can't get your politics out of the way, you should want to run a better business.
Right.
Exactly. All right. This next question comes from Jeff Nicholas. As a consumer, how can we help to foster the environment we need/want in craft beer, aside from avoiding those breweries with known or obvious issues?
Eric or Ty, do you guys want to
jump in on that one?
I feel like that. I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry. It sounds similar to the last one.
Hey, Dr. J, yes. Let's see. So as a consumer, how can we help foster the environment we need?
Yeah. Back to the last question.
Yeah.
Invite a diverse group of people out.
Sometimes you have to force diversity in there. It's the unnatural way of doing it, and it might hurt a little, and you might lose a lot of customers. But as a industry, you have to be okay. If you're wanting to do the right thing and the moral thing, you will be okay with losing some business because the community is going to help you no matter what. If you're fostering a diverse community and you'll get customers to replace the customers that left.
Right. Well, and I just think accountability is very simple. Holding breweries accountable, holding yourself accountable, holding other people accountable. If you see that they're doing something wrong, if you see that the behavior is not really matching what you think is right, call it out. Like, I'm such a big fan of calling things what it is. You know, I hate and love Worst Beer Blog, but I love it more than anything because my thing is operating your truth no matter what. Even if that truth is hateful sometimes, I'd rather know who you are than you to pretend to be someone else. Yeah. And so I think the biggest thing for this conversation on both the consumer and the industry side is holding people accountable. And that means holding yourself accountable. It means me not being okay with being the token Black girl in the industry and not being okay with being the token Black girl in spaces and places because it shouldn't be that way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it took reading an article that Dr. J was about, and it took really just self-reflecting and thinking about it to make me realize that. So hold yourself and other people accountable. And that's the best thing you can do to create an industry that you love.
I love you, Gina.
I love all of you guys. I'm like blown away by this. You guys need to come do a workshop down here at Hoozleville.
And I just want to say, there were so many awesome questions in the comments that we just didn't have a chance to get to. I don't know if we can like throw something together like a Twitter AMA or a live IG like another day or afterward, but I'd be up for it if the other panelists would be up for it. Just answering some of these questions because there's so many great questions over there, and like it's kind of like hurting me a little bit that we didn't.
I know 1 hour is just not enough. Maybe we can go to like 5. No, just kidding. No. So
we'll set it up.
We will set it up. We will absolutely set it up. If you guys are willing to do it, we are willing to do it. I think it's time to have these productive dialogues, and they're great. They're nothing but good stuff's going to come from them. So,
but we are unfortunately out of time.
Yes,
right now
we are definitely out of time.
But we just want to say thank you, all of you, for joining in on the panel. This has been such a great discussion. I've learned a lot from it. So I really appreciate you guys taking your time to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your insights, and just to touch on the things like diversity is the end goal, barriers that need to be removed, shut up and listen. Right. These are things that we can do simply and to keep that in mind, that diversity is the end goal, it's not what we're trying to, it's not the, what did you think? I can't remember what she said.
And it's ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's an ongoing thing that has to be, we have to be very mindful of it. So you guys, thank you so much. And thank you all of the viewers for tuning in. We love you guys. FML Fest 2020. Stay tuned to Instagram. We are going to definitely do something soon. So this discussion is to be continued. So Thank you guys so
Yep.
much for joining us. Thank you, panelists. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Bye.
Eric,
Bye.
Ty, I'll see you guys in a little bit.
See ya.
Have a good one. Bye.
Cheers. I have a beer, but it's over there. Bye, guys.